Hello, I'm Timothy Tyler, and what you are about to view in this film is my senior project depicting what is being done in the field of conservation in my local communities of Chicago, Illinois, and Prescott, Arizona. Through my years of study at Prescott College, learning the methods and theories of conservation biology, we were taught on how conservation was applied in the field as well as the complicated scientific language used. What I was not seeing much of was ways for the communities to learn what is being done around them in the name of conservation and how they can help or get involved. My understanding of the growing age is that they predominantly learn through visual manners, video being the best to leave memorable impacts on them. I then began to mix my minor of multimedia skills with my major of conservation biology to create this bridge between the gap in the public and conservation realm. This will be done through easily digestible content that will leave impacts on the communities wanting to aid in conservation. Within this film, I will be taking you through the areas of the Lincoln Park Zoo in Chicago, Illinois, and the Park Heritage Zoo and Prescott College that is located in Prescott, Arizona, to determine what they are doing in the name of conservation. The selection of these locations were chosen based on how active in conservation work they are as well as their accessibility for public involvement. While in Chicago, I was able to speak with an intern at the Lincoln Park Zoo, Margaret Huck, who went on to speak on to some of the programs that were open to the public that are not widely known. Also, she went into detail on some of the conservation programs the city has her currently working on. Back in Prescott, Arizona, I spoke with the deputy director of the Park Heritage Zoo, Raquel Gardner, who gave me a one-on-one interview of all the programs present at the zoo. We also spoke on her views of conservation and the state it is in. From there, I spoke with two more people from Prescott College, one of who was in charge of the reintroduction and maintaining the native foliage around the campus, as well as maintaining the creek that ran through the campus, Nick Balick. Nick presented me with insight to how public involvement led to the deconstruction of a road and the reintroduction of the creek through the conservation work of the Butte Creek Restoration Council. The other person I spoke with was the professor of Prescott College, Douglas Humes, who took me on a tour of how the college has maintained a conservation mindset with regards to the campus through its construction, planting of species, and materials used. From these perspectives, I am able to present to the community of Prescott, Arizona, Chicago, Illinois, and even the greater public of the United States that view this film how easy it is to actually participate in conservation work around them through a video-friendly format.
My name is Margaret Huck.
And what's your position at the zoo?
Yeah, I'm the Urban Science and Community Engagement year-long intern in the Urban Wildlife Institute.
Are there any conservation programs in your department?
Yeah, so the zoo as a whole has 5 different science departments. The Urban Wildlife Institute is just one of them, but that basically focuses on doing research on wildlife in Chicago and the Chicagoland area, looking at how wildlife uses an urban area and how we can better plan our cities to promote wildlife. So we do a bunch of different studies. One of them is a camera trap study, so they put out camera traps in anywhere from the Loop out to the western suburbs, trying to capture images of the wildlife and looking at what's there, how they use the space, how they're moving through an urban space. We do bat monitoring across the city, so we put up bat monitors which use their echolocation sounds to figure out what species are there. We do small mammal trapping, so we, across an urban gradient, do trapping a couple times throughout the summer and into the fall to figure out what's there. We look at their stress levels by collecting hair and fecal samples. And then the camera trap study is actually part of a wider network called the Urban Wildlife Institute Network. So it's happening across 7 other cities in the States and actually one in Canada, and we're trying to expand it into an international scale. So those other cities are following our lead in the camera trap study to figure out how urban wildlife use urban settings.
How well do you think the zoo executes its conservation efforts?
I think they've done a really good job. Zoos have really transitioned from just a place where people come and look at animals, less of an entertaining experience, and now our core goal is really to conserve wildlife and educate people on wildlife species and stuff. So yeah, zoos are more of a place for science and education rather than just exhibition of animals.
So at Lincoln Park, do you think there's a large volunteer and public involvement?
Yeah, we actually have a lot more volunteers than staff here. We couldn't do what we do without the volunteers. So they're anywhere from education to conservation and science. We have volunteers going through our camera photos and tagging animals. There's volunteers out at little booths that we have around the zoo, educating people and doing hands-on activity with kids. So yeah, they're a really important part of the zoo.
So one final question. I think there's a large misconception to zoos.
Yeah, I think there is, and I definitely had a different perception before I started working here of what zoos were. I always thought of them as kind of like a sad place where animals are just locked up for human pleasure, but now I see behind the scenes how much conservation work goes on and the science that goes into just the population management of zoos. They don't take any animals from the wild anymore. That's a really outdated practice. So basically, all of zoos are part of this. Well, the Lincoln Park Zoo and a lot of other major zoos are part of the Association for Zoos and Aquariums, and they all work on population management together. So they, based on genetics, use the populations of animals that are in zoos across the country, and they share animals and breed animals to keep the gene pool diverse and strong, and yeah, we all kind of work together to conserve wildlife now.
Thank you.
Well, my name is Doug Humes, and I've been teaching at Prescott College for 40 years now, and I just was asked to share about the landscaping at Prescott College, and it's something that I think is very special, that we have been working on as a community. Coming up with the idea and actualizing it has been a long process, but I'd like to introduce to the landscaping at Prescott College. And so our goal is to provide a foundation of awareness, appreciation, knowledge, and understanding of Prescott College's effort to create a landscape that is largely composed of trees, shrubs, and perennials that are primarily from local and regional origins. Another goal is to create an edible garden including herbs, vegetables, and trees, as well as native vegetation that was utilized by the indigenous peoples of the Southwest. And so I think this complements our idea of sustainability and certainly ecological awareness. And so I'm going to be talking about how this landscape evolved and some of the characteristics that I think are really special to this, and something that's worthy of sharing to the community at large. Already I've noticed in Prescott that there is more discussion about using native vegetation and drought-resistant vegetation for landscaping, which is to me a no-brainer. So I just have been part of this design, and just as an example, this is an alligator juniper that I planted for one of my students, Laura Beebe, who graduated a number of years ago. And this whole campus has been a compilation of trees that were specifically purchased as memorial trees that are native or indigenous, and then also we've rescued a lot of the vegetation from areas that have been developed. And so in that regard, we also got trees Campus USA designated by the Arbor Day Foundation, and that basically means that we've got a management plan for our trees, and that everybody from the facilities manager to the groundskeepers are aware of what our goals are and that we're trying to be consistent along those lines. And so I'm just going to take you around on this little tour and show you some of the incidentals that we've got that I think are part of the story. So one of the areas that I've been very interested in is traditions related to trees, both in our country and from my ancestral background in Scandinavia. I've been doing research on folklore related to trees in Norway and Sweden, and one of the traditions that I came across is in Norwegian referred to as a tuntre, which translates to a courtyard tree, or in Swedish it's referred to as a vårdträd. And a vårdträd is really means the caring or guardian tree. This is a tree that was believed to have been a tradition that was started back in the Viking period or even before that, where a tree was planted on the grave of the original farmer, and it was believed that your ancestral spirits of all the generations that have lived on the farm eventually go to reside in this tree, and the care of the tree ensures the health of the farm, and the health of the farm is reflected in the health of the tree. And so I thought it would be a symbolic gesture from my background and interest to have a courtyard tree planted here at the college. And I picked Arizona sycamore because even though it is not found naturally right here in Prescott, it is a native Arizona tree, and I believe it is at its kind of highest level of elevation where it can grow right now, but with climatic change, I think it's going to be in a better condition to be able to function here in Prescott. And we have several individual Arizona sycamore on the campus, but this one in particular was planted perhaps a little too deep several years ago, and as a result it has died back almost every year. And ironically or coincidentally, it's kind of been a challenging time at the college that is now seeming to be on the upward swing, both with student numbers and a lot of our financial situation is improving. And so I think we're optimistically going into the future. And this tree to me symbolizes what I would say is in Swedish is a word that is naturminapteknera, and it means the recorder of nature's memory. And so we've had that actually engraved in a rock here that's at the base of this tree. And I think this year the tree is actually going to take off, and it's become established. I think it's adapted to the microclimate here, and it looks like it's going to be a vigorous tree, and hopefully has several trunks that represent the different parts of the college, and kind of a symbolism of how we need to take care of the campus and the tree, as well as take care of the college in kind of a symbiotic relationship as it relates to sustainability. And so hopefully this tree will be here for years to come, and will be appreciated for the history that it has recorded in its markets. So one of the really unique characteristics of our campus is that the design of it was a community integrated process. We had a lot of students, a lot of faculty and staff who participated. The Routson family, the two sons, Cody and Kanan, and their father, had a really important part of this landscape in that they did a lot of the construction of it. But what we did was they went and got recycled concrete from a parking lot downtown next to where the Dinner Bell Cafe is now. And so a lot of the stonework here is recycled concrete from that area. And we've also integrated in some other rocks and actually artifacts from the Mercy Hospital that used to exist just to the north of the Manzanita building, and the chapel, which is the Sisters of Mercy, was their administrative headquarters too before it became Prescott College. But we wanted to include some of the background on that, so you can see it laid in the stonework around here. Bottles that were from the 1920s that were found after the hospital burned, and were kind of part of the the ground here that was excavated for the present building that we have here now. And a lot of the vegetation then here is also been established here by what I would refer to as a canyon effect. So we've taken into consideration that we've got a east-west oriented courtyard here with a north-facing slope and a south-facing slope, and this has created a microclimate where it is much cooler on the north-facing slope than the south-facing slope. And so in that regard, we can take native vegetation that would normally occur in a warmer setting and put that on the south-facing slope here, even including, like, we've got mesquite here, which normally grows at a lower elevation. And then we've got other plants that have been rescued from the area in actually the old campus from Prescott College. So we have a lot of chaparral varieties that we've kind of put in the middle. And then on the north-facing slope, we've been able to actually put in vegetation that is from the transition life zone here in Arizona, which would be ponderosa forest, Albadia, juniper, and Gamble's oak. And so that particular planter over there is, I kind of dedicated a Hughes planter because I planted a clump of oaks for my parents and my brother, all who have passed on. But they were, my brother was very much into trees along with me, and my parents were teachers, and so that's a clump of oaks that I've kind of planted in memory of my family, as well as a Doug fir that was actually brought to the area by the Forest Service. Turned out to be a shipment of Doug fir and Engelmann spruce from the northwest, but it was shipped here to the southwest, and one of my housemates at the time was working for the Forest Service, and he's an alumni of Prescott College, so he gave me a bunch of the trees. And the Doug fir there is actually from the northwest, but it's doing quite well. Doug fir tend to be able to adapt to microenvironments, especially if they can have enough water. The irony is that we found that shortly after the tree had been planted, that it was not doing well, and I noticed that it was because unbeknownst to the maintenance people, when they would be shoveling the snow and ice, there had been salt that had been spread, and so they actually put piles of snow in these planters that had high levels of salt from the winter ice that they were trying to melt, and that unfortunately nearly killed the trees that we had in the planters. So a lot of our experimenting here is also finding out that generally maintenance of our sidewalks needs to take into consideration the vegetation that we have there, and this is something that I've noticed throughout even northern Arizona, where a lot of the salts that are spread on the highways are affecting the trees that are along the margin of the highways. So we need to understand this, and I think part of the process is when you get involved in using native vegetation and landscaping, you begin to appreciate that you both get the benefit of drought-resistant vegetation, but there's a lot of care that's involved that requires people who have specialized training to understand what needs to be done, at least until the plants and vegetation has become established. So behind me is a pretty extensive wall of the recycled concrete, and I think it's been done in a pretty aesthetic way. There's actually little niches in there. There's one place where there's a bottle that students have put in messages from their time here, and there's also a little tower over here by the library that the Routson brothers built as kind of it's almost like an Anasazi kind of relic, but it's been a really attraction for kids to go in and climb around there, and so I think it demonstrates that landscaping should be engaging and fun, and encourage people to explore and discover, and that's certainly been the case with the landscaping that we've accomplished here. And behind me is an ash tree. It's one of the oldest, largest ash in the area, and unfortunately it was growing close to the power lines that came in certainly after the tree started growing. In any case, we were able to come to a compromise with Arizona Public Service, and they had to take half the tree away because it was growing up into the power lines. but we were able to compromise and leave half the tree that's growing actually over to shade the cafe, and it's not as beautiful as it used to be, but it's certainly still a visual, I'd say, attraction to our campus by able to have this old tree here and have the wall actually curve around it and be part of the landscape design. And we're also down here at the creek, Butte Creek, and this is where we've, over the last 20 years, had a program. This used to be a throughway for one of the roads here in Prescott, and we were able to get that condemned and actually exchanged with the city, so now it's part of the Prescott College campus. And so we have started what's called the Butte Creek Restoration Project, and that's to eventually replace some of the exotic species of trees like the Siberian elm with native species. And all of the cottonwoods and willows were planted here from cuttings that were taken from genetically appropriate trees from this area. What we found is that a lot of the cottonwoods or riparian species that you might even be able to find at a nursery are not necessarily genetically appropriate for the place, or they've hybridized them. So what we've found that is the better alternative is to actually take cuttings from these trees. If you insert them in the ground in January when they don't have leaves, and get their bottom of the cut down into where the water table is, there's a good likelihood that they'll root, and we've had a very good success here. Nick Baylock, who's now been hired as the maintenance person in landscaping, is also a graduate of Prescott College, and he also has become the main person employed to maintain the native landscaping at Prescott College, and he's also in charge of the Butte Creek Restoration Project, which involves students and continued restoration that is going to help turn this section of creek into hopefully a showplace of what the riparian ecosystem should look like in Prescott.
All right, Tim, so the Butte Creek Restoration Education Project started about 23 years ago, right where I'm standing. 4 students came together and noticed that there was a road impacting the ecological functions of Butte Creek. And these 4 students worked together through multiple semesters to ultimately work with the city of Prescott and Prescott College to collaborate an effort on closing Garden Street, which is the road that came through right where I'm standing. From that sign up there, all the way down the road that way. And as you can see, we now have thriving cottonwoods and ash trees and willows, right where there used to be a pretty compacted road. There was very little vegetation growing. The creek was unable to meander, and fast forward 23 years later, we have some healthy vegetation. So wherever you stand in a watershed. These signs are inundated all throughout downtown Prescott, and they're a geographically sound watershed map showing you where the boundaries are, what streams come down through the watershed, and through education and conservation, we're able to communicate what it is that we're doing on this restoration project, and education is one of them. So Tim, where we're at now, this is what's known as the Willow Street Trailhead, and behind you is where the village is located. And when the village was being built, a lot of the construction had been placed somewhere, and it was placed right where we're standing. And what happened is it really compacted the soil, and a couple students came along similar to the Butte Creek project, and they realized, oh, there's some ecological destruction that occurred here from our construction of the village. And they took it upon themselves to reestablish native plants. They created a little trailway for traffic to come through that's connected with the Greenways Trail system. And there's even some aspects of education here. We had another student actually implement their senior project, which incorporates, again, our signs This is a geographically sound metal sculpture rendition of our Granite Creek watershed, and it's a real highlight on kind of the back ways into our campus. So Tim, in our restoration effort here, we're constantly removing invasive species such as Siberian elms and Vinca major, and we're replacing them with native vegetation, including cottonwoods, ash, willows. And the reason why we're doing this revegetation is we're minimizing monocultures and promoting biodiversity. When it comes to removing invasives, why don't we just chop all the elms down? Well, they are still providing ecological services to this project. So there's a gradual effort of removing the invasives and replacing them with the natives. So what do we see here? A lot of people would say a pile of sticks, and they'd be right. This is what's known as a revetment, and it's also used for bank stabilization. We live in an urban watershed, and when we're working on a restoration effort inside an urban watershed, we have to deal with channelization of our streams. And fortunately, we have quite a bit of space here to allow the creek to naturally meander back and forth. And what we found here is the creek was meandering towards the foundation of the library. So we utilized restoration methods to implement revetments and waffles, which are these rock kind of cairns that are set at about a 45-degree angle. And what this does is it captures debris, leaf matter, other nutrients flowing downstream, and actually regrows the bank and stabilizes the cultivars that we have here, including our cottonwoods, our willows, this apple tree, and it allows for the creek to provide its functions of moving sediment, water, and nutrients downstream. So where I'm standing is a wonderful glimpse of what we're striving for in the future. We have this established Goodings willow that's kind of creating this little canopy over the creek, and then there's the second story canopy of the cottonwood that's right next to it. And what we're seeing in this area is, one, that there's moisture, so it's a cooler temperature. We see a lot more spikes of biodiversity, more birds and plant life in this area. And we can also see that the work that we're doing has been successful. This is a cottonwood that is regerminating on its own. We didn't plant this cottonwood here, nor some of these other ones in this location. So what we're doing is working, and by establishing other plants to a good indicator of healthy ecological systems is what am I trying to say?
Rehabilitation?
The propagation of new species.
Oh, not reintroduction, but something similar?
Like, the plants we're planting are repopulating themselves. That's a good indication of ecological functions. Self-reintroducing. Kinda, yeah. So we have these cottonwoods that are able to reestablish themselves, which is a great indicator of healthy ecological functions. So one of the largest efforts that Butte Creek is a part of is water quality monitoring. Prescott is listed as an active management site, and we have a handful of streams that spike above EPA standard for water quality. The biggest thing that we test for is E. coli, and we normally test, we have about 5 different sites that we test, and we collaborate with the Arizona Department for Environmental Quality, Prescott Creeks, and we collaborate on collection of data, and we share this data that allows for action to then potentially ensue. Many of the sewer lines here in Prescott used to line the creeks back in the 1920s, because if I was a civil engineer, gravity works, working down the creek bed, and Unfortunately, a lot of these pipes were made out of clay and are now being collapsed due to the root systems of the surrounding vegetation. So Prescott is putting forth a solid effort on replacing these old pipelines, but in the meantime, we're still seeing spikes above EPA standard in our creeks. Our creeks are heavily polluted. Don't drink, don't touch the water. There's efforts going on in repairing the creeks, whether it comes to water catchment basins, reestablishing heavy decomposers of pollutants such as cattails, many of those facets. So yeah, we're always keeping an eye on our water.
Hello, my name is Raquel Luna Gardner, and I am the Deputy Director at Heritage Park Zoological Sanctuary.
What is your role at the zoo?
So I'm Deputy Director, Director of Operations. I'm kind of second in charge of the zoo. So our director is Pam McLaren, and she has been for about 10 or 12 years. I am very new to Heritage Park Zoo. I've been here just for a few months. So it's a new position. The zoo is growing, and they decided they actually needed kind of another person to help oversee the zoo.
So what's a little bit of your background pertaining to the career in general and conservation?
Sure. So I'm from Chicago. I went to Loyola University, where I got my undergrad. I got my master's from George Mason in zoo and aquarium leadership. But when I was an undergrad, I was pre-med, and I thought that was what I was going to do. And I happened to take an internship at Brookfield Zoo, and that's where I first, kind of fell in love with working at the zoo. I worked there for 12 weeks for college credit, loved it. I worked in the marine mammal department and pretty much figured out that's what I wanted to do for the rest of my career. I stayed with Brookfield Zoo for 5 years. I worked my way up in positions to be a marine mammal trainer. So we worked with dolphins, harbor seals, sea lions, walruses, birds, all kinds of stuff, but a lot of marine mammals and a lot of training, which I really enjoyed. Then I moved to Arizona, and I worked at Phoenix Zoo for 10 years, managing the program animal collection and on-site programs and kind of zoo training at the zoo. And after 10 years, I decided to do some consulting for smaller zoos, including Heritage Park Zoo. So I've been consulting here for, since 2016, I think. And I really loved working at the zoo because it's much smaller, so it's very different. And when they decided that they needed another executive position, I signed on, and that's how I got here.
What is the mission statement of this organization?
So Heritage Park Zoo believes in conservation through education, and I really think, that's a baseline for every zoo in the country. We have a mission to care for animals, but I think Heritage Park Zoo goes beyond, and that's included in its name is not only are we a zoo, but we're a sanctuary. And that's very different because not only do we care for animals, but most of our collection is really animals that could not have survived in the wild due to either being abandoned or orphaned or confiscated from game and fish or injured in some way that they were no longer able to go out into the wild. So much of our collection here came through those processes, and we don't do any breeding. So really, we are a zoo, but most of our animals are here because they didn't have a home anywhere else. So I always like to say, every animal here has a story, and I think those stories are what are really important because it shares with people that animals. The wild isn't a perfect place as much as some people would like to think, and injuries happen and accidents happen, and animals more and more need help from somebody. And so that's something that we can provide for them. We can be that sanctuary. And when we can release animals, we do, which is a great. That's our ultimate goal. But when we can't, we try to take them in and or place them into another safe home.
Aside from the mission statement, do you guys have any other conservation goals that are currently being set forward?
So we have several different things going on. We are not an AZA zoo. We're a smaller institution. And because we do sanctuary, we're not eligible to be an AZA accredited zoo at this time because that's not part of what they do. But we still participate in species survival plans. One in particular is our Mexican gray wolf program. We've been participating in that for many years, and we've been one of many stakeholders that have been working towards breeding Mexican gray wolves and or holding them until they can be placed somewhere for breeding. So we don't actually breed here, but we've been holding animals. So we recently had a female that we had moved to another sanctuary to be paired with a male, and we took in 3 females that we're going to hold here until they get placed for breeding and or release. So we participate in that SSP program, and that's just one particular program that we're really proud of because it has made a difference. Their numbers have grown, and more animals are being introduced into the wild.
Is there any public involvement, and to what degree is there at the zoo?
Yeah, there is a great deal of public involvement here at the zoo, primarily as volunteers and or docents. The zoo itself was created by a few individuals who decided they wanted to do something for wildlife. They had a passion for wildlife. I think Payson Zoo was closing 30 years ago, and they decided to take in those animals and make Heritage Park Zoo. And so that was just the beginning. It was just a few individuals who just had a passion for working with animals that started it all. And really, it's through volunteers and docents that we've been growing the zoo. Otherwise, it's something we would not have been able to do just with staff alone because we're a very small zoo. We're only 10 acres. We have very minimal staff. But through sponsorship, through donations, through volunteer time, which is huge, and docents wanting to help us with our educational programs, they are really the ones that have really helped us grow more and more as an institution.
So are there any programs in place at the zoo for the community to have a part in?
Yeah, we have a lot of different programs, even for different age groups. For really young kids, we recently started a Zoo Littles program, and it's really more about nature and getting kids learning about the value of the growing things in the earth and what the earth gives back to us, and giving them those foundational types of lessons. So we have our own garden, we have our own earthworm area, and just getting them interested and excited about nature and animals and how they help us. We have older programs for teens. We have a Zoo Teens program, really to get them involved in the community, allow them to be volunteers at the zoo, and teach them, what is involved in caring for animals here at our sanctuary. And even up to, we have older volunteers. Actually, anyone 18 or older can volunteer at the zoo. And in fact, they are a primary resource for our entire institution to continue really to run and exist. We have a docent program that really teaches them really in-depth about the science, about animals. They take out different boxes and share with kids, either on-site or off-site, educational things like, how we can tell different skulls apart, or why are reptiles amazing. So they bring all these different kinds of educational tools, not only throughout the park, but then to schools as well. So we really work with a whole wide ranging group of ages, and we really try and cover the benefits of learning about animals and nature in order to get out that conservation through education message.
Aside from what you just said right now, what sets this zoo apart from other organizations of the similar vein?
So one thing that's kind of unique about our institution is we're a Heritage Park Zoological Sanctuary, and that's slightly different because we are a sanctuary. Most of our collection is based off of animals that were either injured or non-releasable. They were abandoned. They were confiscated from owners that were holding animals illegally. So we try and be a sanctuary for those animals that need a home, and when we can, we try to re-release them. Most zoos don't create the sanctuary as part of their mission, and most don't do rehabilitation. They've always been kind of two separate types of organizations, but we've really kind of melded it into one, and so that makes us fairly unique. There aren't very many zoological sanctuaries that do rehabilitation like we do.
Think how well you are at executing your goals in relation to bringing in animals that are injured or that have been harmed in some way and rehabilitating them.
So we do about 200 rehabilitations a year, or 200 rescues a year. We don't track, or at least I don't have the numbers with me to say, how many were out of those were released, or how many, died because of their injuries, or how many are housed here or were rehomed. But we take in about 200 animals a year from a variety of different resources. Mostly it's individuals within our community that say, hey, I found this owl like on our front porch, or we found this coyote cub, all by itself. Those things come to our door throughout the year. Baby bird season is huge, and we try and really get the message out there that most birds who you find on the ground aren't necessarily abandoned. They're mostly just fledglings. So we try and get those messages out, but throughout the year, due to injury and for all of those other reasons, we service about 200 animal rescues a year. And, some of them are successful and we can re-release them into the wild. Some of them may not make it, and some of them end up getting rehomed. So we're really proud of our contribution to caring for the wildlife in our community.
Is the zoo ran first as a business, then a conservation plan, or vice versa?
So the Heritage Park Zoological Sanctuary is a nonprofit 501c3. So that means that we operate as a nonprofit. So any type of attendance, any type of programming costs, whether we hold an event here, all those funds help for the zoo and the sanctuary to exist. So our mission is to educate the community and our attendees, and by selling tickets at the door or doing presentations at school, it helps us to do both. It helps us to fund what it is we want to do, and it also is really the essence of what we do, is getting our message out there about the importance of caring for wildlife, instilling those concepts into, people of all ages. So I consider us a nonprofit, a true nonprofit, in the sense that everything that comes in the door, we put right back into the zoo. And some years, we might have a little extra at the end of the year, and most years we don't. And so we rely on donations, we rely on corporations, we rely on volunteers, all those different entities to help us to continue to move forward and fulfill our mission.
Okay. What is your personal view on zoos, and if there are any, do you think there are any misconceptions related to zoos?
I think having zoos around, is an essential part of our society. more and more we have congregations of people living in tightly packed cities with very little access to nature, to agriculture, to wildlife. And we can't continue to be as disconnected from the earth as we are in some of those places. You need to be exposed to those things. You need to appreciate, you know, insects and worms and things that grow from the earth. And I think learning those things early on really helps for people to appreciate, you know, why wildlife is important. So I think that's one level of why zoos are important. And I think the level above that is, you know, I always kind of fight the concept of does the term wild even exist anymore? I don't think so. I think you can go to any part of the planet and you will feel the ramifications of um, human the human impact on the world. If you go to Antarctica, the temperatures are changing. If you go to the bottom of the ocean, you'll find plastic. There really is not a part of our Earth that isn't impacted by human touch already. So when we say, you know, everything's, you know, better for animals in the wild, and you know, I think wild is a concept that's very quickly disappearing. And those are the things that we need to help people to understand and appreciate. And then above and beyond that, I think zoos are our line of defense in trying to help wildlife that is being impacted directly. One of the best things that we've learned in, you know, husbandry and animal welfare and caring for animals in zoos and aquariums is that, you know, how do you treat them? How do you treat a sick animal? How do you bring it back from, you know, near death occurrences? How do we help these animals breed? How do we what kind of environment and understanding of what kind of environment an animal needs to really thrive? You know, those are all the concepts that we've learned over time, and now those really that important information is very important in how we're going to help wildlife in the future. You can turn on the TV any day and find, you know, ramifications of wildlife that are in need. There was a big die-off just the other day of sea turtles because the temperature swings are so extreme right now. Sea turtles thought, hey, I'm going to go north and it's still warm, and all of a sudden the temperature drops very quickly and they're not able to combat that severe weather extreme. And so there was a huge die-off of some 300 animals on the eastern seaboard. So, you know, they were taken to aquariums. You know, they're trying to keep as many of them as they can alive so that they can be re-released. But more and more, I think we're going to see instances of things like that occurring. And, you know, zoos, aquariums, rehabilitation centers, they're going to be the ones that are going to have to really pitch in and, you know, go to bat for these animals that are going to need our help.
Do you believe the actions you are performing at this organization are actually aiding in your conservation efforts?
That's a really good question. I think there are two answers. I think there's the short-term answer where, yes, we help wildlife that walks into our door, you know, every day, whether it's an injured animal or a confiscated animal. So we treat those animals and re-release them, like I said, or rehome them. So that's kind of the short-term. Yes, we're really caring for our wildlife in our community. And then I think there's the long-term answer, because I think what we do is really plant seeds in our attendees' minds, from our youngest audience at Zoo Littles. You know, wow, worms are cool, bugs are cool, growing things from the earth is cool. Those are concepts that, you know, are started in kids at a young age and then grow from there. And I think our success will be determined in if they really, you know, take up the project of helping the earth, and, you know, being involved and caring about wildlife and wild things and wild places. So we hope that all the programs that we do, all the conservation and education and going out to school groups will really pay off in the long run and really get kids connected with the earth and appreciate those wild things so that they will then want to protect it in the future.
From a personal standpoint, what do you believe the best method to ensure conservation is?
That's a really hard question. And I think all we can do is keep working at it, keep talking about it, keep teaching about it, keep people engaged with why conservation is important. Because I think, those are the things that will, hopefully over time get more ingrained in people. And the more they see, the changes that are occurring on our planet and, unfortunately, more and more extinctions happening, I think, more and more people will realize, we need to take more action and be better stewards of our planet. And that's the goal.
Stepping away from the organization itself, how do you believe conservation needs to be changed going forward in the future?
Oddly enough, I think one of the things that zoos and aquariums haven't done well is really share with people the impact that they have made. Yes, we engage our audiences. Yes, we teach conservation messages. But there is a lot of science and a lot of research and a lot of behind the scenes conservations that take place that we don't, I think, toot our own horn loudly enough about. I think a very good example of that is in Sarasota, Florida. They've done, over 20 years of research on wild dolphin populations and learning about what it is they do and taking samples and learning what a healthy dolphin is in the Gulf waters of Sarasota. And that became hugely important when the BC oil spill occurred, BP oil spill occurred, because we could then say this is what a healthy dolphin looks like, and this is what a dolphin looks like now that it's been surrounded and breathing in oil fumes, et cetera, et cetera. And so that was a very big thing. And it was because we had done all this conservation and research over decades that we could say, yes, we know what a healthy dolphin looks like, and we know what has happened as a result of this oil spill. And so those kinds of things people, don't hear about. Those kinds of lessons don't make it into the media all the time. But it was crucial in really kind of showing the impact that one oil spill did to wildlife. And we had the science and the data to back all of that up. And that was all science and data that was supported by zoos and aquariums.
Do you think the organization is benefiting the conservation cause?
I definitely believe we are helping conservation, but we are just one of many different organizations that are working towards conservation goals. And I think that's what it's going to take to make conservation a much more prevalent and successful thing. We do our small part in our community, but that makes a big difference for the wildlife that does come in our door. So, and then I think, sharing our message with the community, young and old, really helps and affects people's actions when they are in the wild. And we see that every day with people coming in and bringing in an injured skunk or an injured wild bird. The fact that people care is a very big deal. And what we want to do is really just expand that to more and more people to realize that, yes, everyday individuals can really help in conservation in many different ways, not just by coming to a zoo or an aquarium, but what they do in their backyard. What products do they buy? Do they recycle? Do they support missions that will, help wildlife? So those are the types of things that I think we take a small part in changing people's ideas and hopefully affecting their actions.
What is conservation in your eyes?
Conservation is huge. It happens in every little thing you do. It's in the choices that you make every day. And I just think connecting some of those choices in people's minds is what we need to do. There's a huge effort, I think, in Seattle to get rid of straws. And while that seems like such a little thing, it's a huge thing for the environment. Plastics in our ocean is a very big problem. And by saying, hey, we believe, we're going to take this one small step, which is a huge giant step for oceans and all the biosystems that live in them. So conservation can be very little things, whether I'm going to use a straw or not, to whether I'm going to, visit a national park, or whether I'm going to learn more about the wildlife in my community. Conservation takes lots of different, I think, there's so many different types of conservation, but I think they're all very valuable. And sometimes it's hard to, tackle all of that. And so we are just, like I said, one small piece of that giant conservation message and that conservation movement. We want to help the wildlife in our community, and we want to help educate the individuals, the children, the teens, and the adults, about the nature that surrounds them here in our very own community.
Is there any questions for me or anything that you feel like you want to say about this zoo or prior zoos that you would like in the film?
Yeah, I would say, you were asked earlier if I thought people have misconceptions of zoos, and I definitely do. I think we've done a lot of really good, not to say that we have a perfect track record. I think every type of business or organization improves as they go along. And I think that's what's important. If we aren't growing, if we aren't trying to do better, if we aren't trying to actively be taking care of our collections and providing animals with the best life experiences that we can, then yes, then we're not fulfilling our mission. But I think zoos are ultimately trying to improve, not only our collections' everyday lives, but the everyday lives of animals in the wild as well.